Well, good afternoon. I'm Rock Jones, the president here at Ohio Wesleyan, and I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to this very special occasion as we gather marking the debut of the film 42 and are able to share the recollection of the role of Ohio Wesleyan and Delaware, Ohio in the development of the story that led ultimately to the story told in the film that is now showing across the country and around the world. And this afternoon, we have the great fortune to have with us Branch Rickey III, the grandson, of course, of Branch Rickey, and then Bob DiBiasio from the Cleveland Indians, because in addition to the story of Branch Rickey and Jackie Robinson with the Brooklyn Dodgers, there is the story of Larry Doby's arrival with the Cleveland Indians later that day. So this afternoon, we have the opportunity to reflect upon a seminal moment in American history, a moment that led to a series of events that have in many ways changed the structure and complexion of our society, much for the better, and that has a very special relationship with this campus. Roger Ingalls is our Director of Athletics, and he'll serve as the moderator for our discussion. So without further ado, welcome, and Roger, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rock, and it's my pleasure to be up on stage today with two of the greatest baseball men in the country. Would you please welcome Branch Rickey and Bob DiBiasio. If I do my job right, you're not going to hear a whole lot from me the rest of the day. These two have some great stories to share with us, and I think will give us some insight so that when you see the movie 42, and I know there's some people in the audience here that have seen it, you're going to find it to be a very touching, a very moving, not a baseball movie, but a movie about life. I'm going to start. Both of these guys are Ohio Wesleyan graduates, so I'm going to.
We made it.
I made it.
Doesn't he look like Harrison Ford? He's looking good.
Yeah. Well, Branch.
Sorry, Roger.
That's all right. We're going to start with Branch, and then we're going to go to Bob, and I'd like them to kind of explain how they ended up at Ohio Wesleyan and how they've ended up where they are today. Okay?
Oh, boy. Can I ask a question first? I'd just like to see a show of hands how many people have seen the movie. Is there anybody in here that has seen the movie?
Yeah.
We've got a couple. How many are planning to see it tonight? Aha. How many don't care whether they see it or not?
Nobody
Okay.
could.
All right, well, that's great. Ohio Wesleyan and my progression, mine is very, very, very simple. Of course, I had the good fortune to have any number of family members who had attended in advance of my coming here. I had really not given a whole lot of thought to it prior to 10th grade. And my grandparents were coming over for homecoming. And they said, would you like to come along? Well, it wasn't with any thought of picking out a school for where I might be going after graduation. I was just looking for the adventure. And so we came over, and it had so very little to do with, I think, my grandfather's career at that point or his accomplishments in baseball. I just noticed that everywhere we went on campus, there was a genuine friendliness, a contagious friendliness. I couldn't get over the spirit of family that just seemed to pervade that homecoming event. I think I made up my mind at that very moment. It is true that later on my senior year, when I was applying to Ohio Wesleyan, I was at a school in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was not very attentive to who the recruiters were coming around. And one day I just happened to see Ohio Wesleyan University. There was a representative, and so I signed up and went in for an interview. right after noon, and I came out of the interview and I went to phone, and my father had passed away by that point. My mother was at home, and I said, "Is it okay we invite somebody over for dinner?" So sure enough, I invited the recruiter over to dinner, and turned out he was a fraternity brother of my brother-in-law. And when he came into dinner, he sat down, shook hands, and sat down. And as we were eating dinner, he looked at my mother and said, "Good news, your son's been accepted." What I didn't know as of that very moment was that my grandfather was actually on the Board of Trustees. But worse yet, I didn't know that my uncle, John Eckler, was the chairman of the Board of Trustees. And so I don't think I deserved to get in, and of course it was a terrible struggle after I did get in to keep up with the academics, but that's the background of how I've gotten in, and the best decision I ever made.
I'm a legacy as well. My two older brothers came here to Ohio Wesleyan. I think I was on campus for the very first time when I was in 6th or 7th grade, and from that time forward, had been here. My older brother Danny, my brother Tony, the middle brother, is here in the audience. One of the things that I think motivated me was making sure that my mother and father knew that one of their sons could get through freshman year, first quarter, and not be on academic probation. So I was lucky to be able to be the one of 3 brothers that was not on academic probation the first semester. So, but again, having stepped here and since 6th grade, going on through the end of obviously college, we were all Phi Gams. So all 3 went to Ohio Wesleyan. We were all Phi Gams. Not a lot of creativity in our family.
Branch, you're probably the only one in the room who's got a grandfather that was named the most influential sports figure of the 20th century. What's your earliest recollection of him, and when did he really start to influence your life?
I have a wonderful photograph. As a matter of fact, we had my grandfather, when we were with the Brooklyn Ball Club, he had a farm down on the eastern shore of Maryland, Chestertown. And there was a boat there that was an inboard, and we used to go out on the bay. And there's a photograph from that with him sitting in the back of the boat and this 4-year-old sprawled on his chest with 2 arms out and 2 legs out, and I think I'm wearing something fairly close to diapers. And he's just got this look on his face like, well, how great is it to have a grandson? And that's really where my earliest memories date back to, and it's always wonderful to see that photo and just remember that love of family that he had.
Bob, when did you first learn about Branch Rickey?
Well, I think it was, the first movie that Jackie Robinson starred in himself came out in 1950, and 17 years later, as a 5th or 6th grader, doing a report on that, because fascinated by the fact that an athlete, portrayed himself in the movie, and then when you watch the movie, you're, connected to Branch Rickey. But truly, I came to know him well as a reporter and sports editor of the Transcript. During my time here, 4 years, is when the Branch Rickey Physical Education Center was built, and so our junior year is when it was opened. And I don't know how many stories we had written for the Transcript that talked about what he did as a coach here at Ohio Wesleyan, and just doing biographies on him for the paper obviously got me to know him very well.
If you want to read any of those stories, you can go online because they now are digitized.
Please don't.
You can access those stories all the way back into the late 1800s, I believe, when the transcript first started. So,
I may not have been on academic probation, but you may wonder how I graduated if you read those stories.
Branch, your grandfather had an experience at Ohio Wesleyan that helped lead to his signing at Jackie Robinson. Can you share with the audience here a little bit about that experience that he had and what you recollect of it?
One of the refreshing things about living around my grandfather is it always seemed he had another story that you hadn't heard. And he was a delight. I heard him give quite a number of speeches, and I never heard a speech repeated. He had that wonderfully fertile mind and just an ability to either write out his speeches, which he loved to do, or speak extemporaneously. Oddly, the instance you're referring to is one of the very few that I ever heard him repeat. And people would come. Now, of course, I was born almost the same year that Jackie Robinson, it was certainly the same year he signed his minor league contract, a contract with the Montreal Expos for the Dodgers. So that the substance, the import of what this all was about did not settle in on me until I grew old enough to be able to process the information. And I remember this story perhaps when I was 17, no, before that, maybe when I was 6 years old. I think because I heard it a number of times and heard it during those very, very young formative years. But he talked about having a black athlete on his baseball team, and a very, very fine player, Charles Thomas, who on a road trip out of town, they tried to check into a hotel. And I wish, I was so mesmerized by the story that I failed to ask and grasp some of the details. Did they check in at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, or did they check in at 7 o'clock, or exactly what, was it raining outside? What month was it? But the substance of it was that when they tried to check into this hotel in South Bend, Indiana, the desk clerk refused lodging to the one player, the black player. And my grandfather at that point, I think he was coach of the team, and I believe he was maybe even a senior in college at that time, a player and a coach, and a student. But he had one powerful trait that followed him all his life, was he loved a challenge of winning a point, especially if it was a point of substance, not just whether the road went to the right or the road went to the left, but issues of heavier concern, and this one was of concern to him, and I can imagine his intensity coming to bear on that desk clerk, and the fact that he was going to win this argument. He was not going to win the argument, but he, I'm sure, was determined to do so. And when he couldn't find that right solution, or the clerk was going to yield on this, he was not going to give him room, he negotiated a compromise. And that was that he asked that if Charles Thomas could be allowed to stay in his room, if only temporarily, till they found him a room elsewhere. And so he said that later on, when he went up to his room, there was Charles Thomas sitting on the foot of the bed, and tears streaming down his face. And what grabbed me so in that, my grandfather was a catcher, had caught, and here many, many years later, although in the old days, the turn of the century, the catcher's gloves were not the kind of gloves we see today, where you can catch a ball with one hand, whether it's on the left side of your body or down or up or right. In those days, almost any pitch had to be caught in the palm in the palm of the glove, and then you had to get your other hand on it. So you carried your bare hand, what they call the bare hand in catching. You carried your bare hand fairly close to the glove, which means that any foul tip that was not going to go the trajectory, if it went towards your hand, you caught a foul tip. And in those days, if you broke a finger while catching, the obvious remedy with that was tape the broken finger to the good finger and keep on playing. So when you shook hands with my grandfather, it was like grabbing a bag of marbles. His fingers went every which direction, and I could go down that. But here, as I'm hearing him tell the story in his later years, and he's got this hand that is a gnarled hand, and he simulated Charles Thomas sitting on the bottom of the bed, and he said, with the tears streaming down him, he saw me come in the room, and he said, "Mr. Ricky, if I could just rub this color off, if I could just rub it off, if I could get this color off, I'm as good as any man. I'm as good as any man. If I could just get this color off." And when you're hearing that as a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old, it makes a very deep impression. It gave great credibility to me, to the story that he told, that was residual in him for many, many years. But his career was almost, he spent 4 decades in St. Louis. In St. Louis, it was impossible to carry out what he said he promised himself upon witnessing that, was that if he ever had a chance to do something about it, he would try to do something about it. So for 35 years, that languished. I don't think languished is the right word. I think I've chosen the wrong word. That promise to himself was embedded deep down. So it wasn't until he got to Brooklyn, and Brooklyn post-World War II was the American melting pot. Everybody that got off the boat that couldn't speak English and needed to stay close to some ethnic group that understood them stayed in Brooklyn, I think it seemed. So when he got to Brooklyn, the light bulb went off.
Thank you. For both of you, and you can choose to go first here, Bob, if you'd like. Branch Rickey decides to sign Jackie Robinson in 1945 to a professional contract. Okay. A few years later, the Cleveland Indians signed Larry Doby, making him the first African American to integrate the American League. Okay. Why were these so tough decisions for both people, both Branch and also with the Indians? Why was this so tough at that time to do that?
Well, I think any man of vision or a man who's got deep values and doesn't like the status quo is put in a position where he challenges himself to make a move. And I think that's what, as Branch did it when he was here at Ohio Wesleyan, and as Branch indicated, that he carried that through his entire life. Bill Veeck, on the other hand, I never had the opportunity to ask Mr. Veeck this question, but wondered exactly what his motivation was. As we all know, that Jackie Robinson had 2 years of being involved in minor league baseball, and as Daniel Okrent said, the baseball historian, that there was a 2-year drum roll for Jackie Robinson, and Larry Doby just showed up. And that's what Bill Veeck did to the young man at 22. I think, Jackie was 27 when he integrated, and Larry Doby was 22, fresh from the Newark Eagles. So while both men were faced with the same situation, I think Larry's was a little bit more unique.
Boy, I would have to supplement that by saying, and I think Bob caught it right in the first sentence, but I would emphasize it more than he did, that baseball liked the status quo. In the status quo, baseball, yeah, you have to go back and picture this for a moment. Our national pastime has 16 teams, 8 in the American League and 8 in the National League. There's 16 professional teams. It's our national pastime. What's the southernmost franchise? In the southernmost of the 16 teams. What's the southernmost team? St. Louis. What's the westernmost team? St. Louis. We have some people that obviously are steeped in our sport. I should have excluded a few people and asked the rest of you. But here you have a sport that's being played in a quadrant, one quadrant of the United States, and it's our national pastime. To give you an idea of the era in which we're living in, the 1940s, post-World War II. But it was our national pastime, and I just think it had so registered. There's no competition with the NFL. There's no competition with the NBA. There's really no competition for professional baseball being embedded in our culture. And so my answer to you would be, and I need to shut mine off too. I think the answer would be that while the cultural aspects that we all appreciate and what was going on there, but there was probably more of a fear. We got a good thing going. We've got 16 successful franchises that are all stable, we're going along good. Why change anything, or why let this Ricky guy come in and turn the whole apple cart upside down? And that's what this, in the minds, I think, of quite a number of the other clubs. Vec voted against it, as a matter of fact, 2 years earlier before he signs Larry. And I think he was clearly one of those who would have said, let's make sure that we're going to be able to succeed after we do this. Nobody wanted to risk this, the ongoing strength of their franchise to an experiment. That's at least part of it.
One of our staff actually came up with a question today that I kind of want to throw out, Branch. Jackie was subjected to a lot. Death threats. His family was threatened. His kids, his son was threatened. But what about your grandfather? Because that's a story. That's a part of the story that we don't often hear. But he was a guy that had to endure a lot.
I never heard my grandfather mention a single death threat, not a single one. However, information leaked out from his significant other, and she shared it with her daughters, and her daughters shared it with me. But many of the death threats, or the threats, I don't want to say death threats, that composite of the vile letters, they tracked down the home address and sent those letters on home. My grandfather never saw one. My grandmother got them, and she just put them away and pretended they didn't exist, which is how supportive she was in this whole effort. They both realized that there was going to be a backlash. But to me, that is, you're going to see in the movie tonight, I'm not going to tell you anything more about the movie, just in this one statement. You're going to see something about Rachel Robinson's role. And, okay, so I'm going to tell you one other thing about the movie. I have a chip on my shoulder about that movie because they completely ignore what would have been, when Branch Rickey and Jack Robinson first meet, the obvious question that he asked every young ball player that he ever met. Every single ball player he met, and he didn't know him, he asked the same question, the very first question. What was the very first question?
Can you play?
That would have been mine.
Very close. His first question was, are you married? And if that got a yes, it got a, all right, son, glad to meet you. And if it was no, the second question was, do you have a serious girlfriend? What are your intentions was the third question. And that's completely skipped in the movie. And I can hardly stand it. Rachel played a big role. Well, my grandmother is not even referenced in this movie. You'd think Branch Rickey was a bachelor if you watch this movie. Well, he had a woman behind him, and she had as much steel as he did. And those letters were not going to impede her any more than she was going to let them worry him. She attended Ohio Wesleyan, too.
It's kind of a family tradition. We got a couple more in the pipeline for this year, I believe. Bob, the Indians got paid back very quickly. Larry Doby in 1947, 1948. I know one of our conference employees is waiting for this to get repeated. The Indians won the series in 48.
Yes,
right?
indeed.
And,
yes, indeed.
So how did that affect Larry Doby and Satchel Paige? I believe you had Satchel Paige at that time.
In 48, yes.
Yeah, and I heard yesterday in a radio discussion, I heard there was some concern about whether he was 42, 52, 62. We weren't sure how old he really was, but
seems like we're having that same problem nowadays.
Yes, yes.
The age of players is never going to be one that is.
But did that
totally
help?
efficient.
Did that help the city of Cleveland accept those guys by having that kind of success? And the same thing even in Brooklyn with the success the Dodgers were having. Does that make fans more accepting of the change?
Well, I think uniquely in Larry Doby's case in the city of Cleveland, there are a number of variables as to why I think it worked. If you look at our town, at that time in the late 40s, there was a large black population in Cleveland. There was, the Negro Leagues were strong. I think there was something in between 7 and 11 different Negro leagues that played in and out of Cleveland at that time. The Call and Post newspaper was one of the strongest black newspapers in the country. And then again, Bill Veeck, just as Branch Rickey, had the wherewithal to go against the status quo. So I think those variables add up to why Cleveland was a good fit for Larry. Having known Larry as I did for 30-some years and bombarded him with every question you can imagine, some he would answer and some he would not answer. But it's interesting to me that, how folklore plays into this at times. For example, the story goes that Larry Doby's first at bat, he strikes out on 3 pitches, and the star of the team, Joe Gordon, is on deck, strikes out on 3 pitches, and goes and sits next to Larry to show him that this isn't an easy game to play and there's solidarity. When in fact Larry had about a 9-pitch at bat and Joe Gordon was on third base when he struck out. But the movie A Kid in Cleveland, the kid from Cleveland, played it that way. That Joe Gordon batted behind him and struck out and went and sat next to him in the dugout. So then that story ends up being embellished and brought into folklore. But yes, I think winning had a lot to do with Larry being accepted. But I also think if you just think of Cleveland in the very next year and the next year, we had 6 men of color on our team in 1952. And there were still teams who hadn't integrated yet. So
The last team was Boston?
1959 with Pumpsy Green was Boston in 1959. One of the interesting things to me in that is when you look through this, that Detroit, which had a very large black population, was the second last and integrated in 1958. And Ozzie Virgil Sr., I just know that because Ozzie Virgil Jr. and I spent a year together when I happened to be the PR man of the Atlanta Braves for a season away from the tribe, and we would talk about that. So it wasn't just African American, it was men of color, and he was in Ozzie. But a city like Detroit waited till 1958 to integrate.
Branch, your grandfather signed Roberto Clemente, and that was a big move for professional baseball at that time and opened up a whole new market of players as well. Why do you think that doesn't get as much notoriety as the Jackie Robinson story?
It's true that my grandfather brought Clemente to Major League Baseball and thereby, to some degree, broke the Latin barrier. But interestingly enough, a rule had been put into play in baseball to try, the bonuses were seen as this big problem on the horizon, giant problem. They're going to start giving bonuses to players before they even perform in professional baseball. And so they passed a rule that at the end of your first season, at the end of a player's first season, if he were not protected on the major league roster, another major league roster could buy him. And so the Dodgers signed Clemente. It wasn't my grandfather had left Brooklyn and was over with the Pittsburgh Ball Club. And so when Brooklyn signed Clemente and put him on a AAA roster, the former Dodger scouts, who are now working for my grandfather over in Pittsburgh, were immediately dispatched to cull to go see the Dodger players, and if there's anybody we can draft. Pittsburgh was in last place. The Dodgers were in first place. The Pittsburgh club figured if there are any good players, they're likely to be on the Dodgers, and we know them. Let's go figure out who we can buy if they're not protected after their first year. And so the Dodgers were facing a real crisis. If they're going to keep Clemente, and there's some real weak club like Pittsburgh, we're going to have to put Clemente on our big league roster. Well, they can't put Clemente on their big league roster. They've got people like Duke Snyder, Carl Furillo, and they aren't going to be able to take a rookie player who's not ready to perform. Well, a rookie player who can't perform in the big leagues will fit very nicely in Pittsburgh. And he can grow into it. So for a whopping $4,000 at the end of his rookie year, the Pittsburgh Pirates purchased Roberto Clemente and broke that. But I'm not going to tell you about the movie, remember? I'm not going to say anything more about the movie. But I think when you come out of the movie, having seen this film, realizing what Robinson did will give you an appreciation of why Clemente had a veritable cakewalk by comparison those 7 years later, or however many years later. Jackie paved the way, and there's been a couple of books written about the way Jackie made it for the rest of us, some of the subsequent black ball players and their stories. And, you know, one of the phrases misused about Jackie Robinson, it used to grind on me, because really it was a credit to Branch Rickey. They referred to Jackie Robinson as breaking the barrier. Now, if you think about that, to break a barrier in baseball, you had to sign a contract. Well, there would have been every single player in the Negro Leagues who would have broken the barrier if you'd given them a pen and said, sign the contract and you can do it yourself. No, Branch Rickey broke the color barrier. He's the one that signed Jackie Robinson. But that's not to minimize Jackie Robinson. I'm not trying to do that. Jackie Robinson continues to be a lifelong hero of mine, a childhood hero. He's a total hero. What Jackie Robinson did was so much greater than break the barrier. He took, because if you look at Rosa Parks broke, in essence, broke a rule, broke a law. She broke a barrier. You weren't allowed to sit in the front half of the bus. She just walked across from the back half of the bus, the front half of the bus, and sat down. That wasn't what Jackie did. Jackie Robinson went from being excluded, not being allowed to play in professional baseball. There was a I was on a podium 50 years later with a fellow who was a rookie with was a player with Jackie his rookie year. He was a pitcher, went on to manage in the major leagues. And as Rachel was answering a question, and he and I were attending this honorary recognition by Wheaties, they had put the Negro Leagues, Jackie, on the front of the Wheaties box. We were standing at the back of the riser, and he was reflecting. He was in his 80s by that point, and as Rachel was speaking to the press, he leaned over and said to me, you know, the big problem, we thought we were going to win that year. We thought going into the start of the season, we had a good chance to win the pennant. Dodgers were really desperate to win the pennant. The Cardinals had just beaten them out by a couple of games. Got Reese and Furillo and Snyder and Hodges, and it's just a bevy of talent. We thought we could win that year. We didn't know if we could do it carrying Robinson. If we had to carry Robinson, if we had to carry a black player, we didn't know if we could still win. Meant we were competing with one less player on the team, because Negroes were not known to be able to handle the pressure. They were not known to be able to perform in front of large crowds. They were not known to play our kind of baseball. There were all kinds. Jackie did not break a barrier. He shattered a myth. He went from not being allowed to participate, and this, I think, is just representative of myths that get afoot in society on so many fronts. They still prevail still. But he went from not participating to excelling. He didn't just put on a uniform, wear a uniform, and sit on the bench. He went from not participating to being the rookie of the year that year, of all the players that were rookies in Major League Baseball that year. And he carried the team half the season on his shoulders. So while I quibble about who deserves the title of breaking the barrier, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter a hoot. It's unimportant. Jackie shattered a myth.
The signing of Jackie Robinson, ultimately, we look back now and we see that it created a lot of impact on things outside of baseball. Obviously, it's had effect on civil rights legislation. We have a good friend, Branch George Nicholson, Judge Nicholson out in California, studied a lot of this. But it did have a little bit of a negative impact on the professional Negro baseball leagues, because while this was the beginning of black athletes coming to professional baseball, it kind of signaled the end of that league. And as Bob Kendrick, who's president of the Baseball Professional Negro Leagues Museum, mentioned yesterday, at the time, the professional Negro Leagues were the third largest black-owned business, or grossing business, in the country. The question's always been asked, if Branch Rickey had not signed Jackie Robinson, would this have happened? Because the leagues were going strong. Obviously, most of the owners have voted against it. Would the desegregation of professional baseball have happened? I'll leave it to both of you.
Well, I would have to think yes, eventually. No question that somebody was going to stand up. Again, a man of vision, a man who wouldn't stand for the status quo. But we're talking about professional athletics and competition and the spirit of competition and how hungry men are to win in these games. And to let terrific athletes not participate, I don't think it would have been allowed. I just don't think we would have sat there and not had these terrifically talented men not have access. Eventually, it would have had to happen. But thankfully, it happened when it did.
Okay. I know my grandfather had ambition for me to be more concise and be able to answer a question with just a simple answer. But this does provoke some thought. I agree with Bob 100%. Whether it was going to happen in 3 years, 7 years, 11 years, 15 years, I wouldn't have any way to evaluate that. I do know that Martin Luther King did say afterwards, wrote a note to my grandfather, he said it in public, he said it about Jackie, "You made our job easier. You made our job easier." The extraordinary, I think the extraordinary part of this saga that is one of the least appreciated parts of it. And that is in the interface, in the very first hour that they meet, my grandfather wants to know about Jackie Robinson's ability to not, I hope I'm not cheating on your questions, taking away from next question. Wants to know about his ability to not strike back. If struck at, can he not strike back? Here you've got one of the most intense athletes of the 20th century, if not the most intense athlete. Jimmy Brown said to me that he thought he was, of any athlete, Jimmy Brown, the running back for those Cleveland people up there, told me that he thought he was the most intense athlete he ever saw. Well, my grandfather was looking for an athlete that could excel, who would set an example and would not strike back. He read from him out of a book by Papini, the day that they met, about the merit of winning over your adversary by not returning like for like. And in October of 1947, 6 months after Jackie has been the first black-skinned player to play in Major League Baseball, they take a survey. Look magazine, you can look this up on Google. You can look this up on, that's where I found it. I think it's Look magazine, takes a survey at the end of the season, the most admired American in October of 1947. And I'm going to surprise you, this is a trick question, obviously. The guy that wins that is Bing Crosby, naturally. Why wouldn't you vote for Bing Crosby? He's the most admired American in October 1947. What's important is on that list who came in number 2. Number 2 is Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson. I will bet you that not a single black person was polled in that survey. Think about October 1947. Who are the pollsters polling? They aren't polling the black community. So this is a poll of white Americans. In the subsequent years, in the years of today, if you go out and talk to students on this campus or high school students, and you name half a dozen of, when in your childhood years, if you're anywhere near my age, athletes from the 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s of the 20th century, and ask the kids who they were, probably won't remember them. You can include people like Babe Dietrichson or Jesse Owens or Joe Louis. They may not even know what titles they held, what sports they performed in. All of these athletes had as much courage as Robinson. They had as much determination. They had as much stick-to-itiveness. You name all those great skills that a great athlete has, they had them all. Where did Jackie why is it then, I jumped, why is it then that here we are in, 2013? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, 2013, and Jackie's star is still rising. And so many of these superlative athletes who accomplished dozens more records than Jackie ever accomplished are almost forgotten. Because he captured the soul of he captured the soul of America, all Americans. He didn't just win the admiration of African Americans, and so much of that's one of the things I'm a little disappointed in what's going on today. There seems to be a capturing almost in the black community of Jackie Robinson. You know, he's our guy. No, he captured the hearts of all Americans with his ability to withstand abuse and triumph on the field. it's a stunning thing. It's a stunning thing. And he is today remembered, applauded, admired, revered, and so many of those great athletes that had so many of the great skills. But Jackie Robinson treated adversity in an entirely different mode. And that's where Branch Rickey deserves some little share of the pie, because Jackie had a mentor when he broke into Major League Baseball. He had somebody point out to him, here might be a good idea. And matter of fact, the idea that Jackie Robinson signed on to, you know what, if that were today, you'd have clause 42 in the contract, would say sign here and initial out in the column that you understand no other athlete is signing this kind of contract. There's no contract. A 62-year-old man met a 27-year-old man, and in 3 hours they forged an agreement between them, and this transcended any business relationship. This really became a partnership. It was a partnership between two people who never met each other before. I don't think Jackie Robinson even knew where Branch Rickey had been, if he had been somewhere before the Dodgers. So this is where, to me, and this is, I think, the wonderful legacy that's been handed to me, the wonderful insight into the fact that this stands for not just baseball or sports, but this is such a classic example that has been handed down as an example to me of ways to go about interfacing between people that don't have anything in common and can forge that common ground. And Branch Rickey could have never accomplished this, what has been accomplished. He could have never done it without Jackie Robinson, and Jackie Robinson could not have ever done it without Branch Rickey. And it's that kind of ability to work across age gaps, generation, skin color, and so forth.
I want to get to one more question, and then we want to allow you to ask our roundtable guests up here some questions. Branch, your grandfather was heavily involved in Ohio Wesleyan. Both as an alumnus, he was a proud member of Delta fraternity. He used to come back regularly, and from what I hear from some of the former Delts, asked them to vacate their bed for the night so he could use it. But he was really involved in their actions, very much admired. He was on our board. He was involved in situations. I mentioned yesterday when the Rollins College situation, where Ohio Wesleyan had a football game scheduled in Florida and was told we could come, but we couldn't bring Ken Woodward, our African-American tailback, because he wasn't allowed to compete. And our board, with Branch on it, voted not to send the team. We either send them all or we don't go. And a year later, they competed in Florida and Tampa and played. But he was involved in Ohio Wesleyan. And what I'm asking you to, because you lead very busy lives, Bob is vice president with the Indians and all the community service activities you're involved in, and Branch as the president of the Pacific Coast League. Every time we call you, you answer the phone and you respond in a positive manner, just like the roundtable today. Why are you two so connected to Ohio Wesleyan and so willing to come down and be a part of it? And then Branch, maybe a little bit of why your grandfather, you think, was so connected to the university. Bobby?
Well, I think in one word, family. Again, having been on this campus since 6th grade and two older brothers that you idolize, you know, growing up in front of you and going into the Phi Gam house and going to the football games and watching the baseball games and wanting to be a part of that. And also, I firmly believe that I've been lucky to do this for 35 years in professional baseball, 34 with the Cleveland Indians, and I don't have the skill set to do what I did if I wasn't as active as a student here. All the things that Ohio Wesleyan provided, that I could really be so horrible of a writer at the transcript and have Tommy Stinson, who works for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, be my first sports editor and sit me down and just shake his head after I covered my first lacrosse game when I had no idea what lacrosse was coming out of Lakewood, Ohio. And then doing color on football games and doing color on basketball. And where other school, you know, if I went to Ohio State or some other school, I'm certainly not the sports editor and doing color on football and basketball and learning the skill set that would carry you through and have the opportunity to make those mistakes and learn from them for 4 years as you go through school. And when I do have the opportunity to, and I do it a lot now on college campuses and talk to communication students and public relations students, that's the first thing I tell them, is just get out there and practice. This is the time you can fail, and it's good to fail during these years because it's going to be the best learning experience you're ever going to get. And so the foundation of a 35-year career started right here, and so if the phone rings, you have to pick it up out of a sense of duty.
Well, I've never admitted this before in public, but I can rival Mr. DiBiasio in the fact that my freshman English teacher came to the end of the semester and the end of the trimester, I guess we were on, and surveyed the total body of work I had put in front of her and assigned a grade to me of incomplete. I couldn't pass freshman English. And I've always wanted to be able to write well, and I've always been very, very frustrated that I couldn't write at all. And in recent years, I have to admit that when you send some emergency relief force to kind of pull somebody out of somewhere, the SWAT team or something like that, Libby Reed was assigned to me. Dean Ingram told me, Branch, you're going to take Libby Reed's report writing. And so I've been on the mend for the last 40, 50 years. And now with email, I get repeated opportunities to try to write. And sometimes I'm getting feedback now from my cousins of email. Wow, Branch, that was extremely well written. Now, what a wonderful way to phrase that. If there is a document that deserves to be in the Rickey Hall of Fame, it is here at Ohio Wesleyan. It is written between my grandfather, though, not me, and a fellow named Herman Ships, whose grandson is in this audience and is a dear friend of mine and somebody I admire deeply. And if there is one document that will reveal more profoundly what the Rickey feeling about Ohio Wesleyan is, that sums it up. And here was a farm boy who had never had a chance to do the preparatory classes to come to Ohio Wesleyan University, got here anyway, was not able to perform and pass. He mentions even in the letter he only had one pair of pants when he came to college, and he had to press those every night for the next day's school. And that he didn't have 25 cents the entire first semester he was in school. He was on the verge of going back to following around the tail of a mule. And Ohio Wesleyan salvaged him from that by the professors taking a personal interest in him. And he writes repeatedly in that letter about examples of how that happened and when it happened. And I think that every Rickey who's gone here, like most, probably so many of the rest of the students that have ever gone here, when they come away from here, feel that somebody took a personal interest in them in some way, shape, or form, whether to the magnitude of my grandfather's case or whatever other level. That Ohio Wesleyan means that much to us by the time we get out. It's just wonderful to be able to give back.
Thank you.
Roger, I'd be delinquent if I didn't mention Vern Edwards first and foremost. You mentioned that all the transcripts are now online, so there was an email that was sent around to a few of us. Susan Hedden, who was in our class, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, Tom Jolly, who was a New York Times sports editor, Gordon Wicken, who was a senior editor at the U.S. News and World Report, and then some of the older guys, Chip Vichy and Greg Moore, and I think it was Gordon who gave us all the news that we could go back and and look at all of our work as students if we chose to. And Chip Vichy was the one who wrote back and said, I only want to see the ones with the red pen that Vern Edwards. The worst thing in the world as a student journalist, is, especially if you were one of the editors of the sections, Vern would take it, would come out on Thursday morning, and Friday morning you'd walk into Slocum Hall and he'd have the paper pinned up with his red markings all over how horrible you did, and it was like blood seeping from your body. And it was the way we were learning how to be quality journalists, and it was all Vern. Vern was the man.
Well, Dustin, I'm going to ask you if you would, we'd like to take some questions from folks in the audience, and while Dustin's turning his mic on, and I appreciate that we figured out not to have it on through this session. We had some problems earlier this week, or last week, I guess, but, and it wasn't Dustin's fault, don't blame him. But I would like to just see a show of hand of members of the DiBiasio and Ricky families that are here with us today, because I'd like to welcome them. If you could raise your hand if you're...
Wow, look at all of them. Yeah.
Okay, if you would, if you just raise your hand, and Dustin will make his way around, and we'll like to take some questions.
By the way, Branch, Libby says hello. And she's also got a red pen, too, still.
Oh, yeah.
With a lot less red ink in it after I got done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. She and Vern shared red pens.
Yes.
Bob, you obviously represent the major leagues and Branch the minor leagues. Your granddad helped started the minor leagues. There's been a lot of change in major minor league relationships over the years, and right now the minor leagues are strong. I mean, great attendance, and I would guess maybe more people attend minor league games than they do major league games. Bob, first, from your standpoint, from the Indian standpoint, what's the future of the minor leagues for the team? I guess it's changing and will continue to change. And then Branch, maybe from your standpoint also.
Well, I think one of the philosophies that have changed is the closer proximity to the home club, the major league club, to have your minor leagues nearby. That was when I first started. Obviously, we were in Portland, Oregon, and Colorado Springs, and we moved out to Old Town, Maine at AAA. And our AA and single A were wherever you could find a place that would have you. And now, obviously, everybody is with us, Lake County, Columbus, Mahoning Valley, Akron. We have our high A club in North Carolina still. And that was a philosophy change by the baseball guys, that they want to be able to go and grab a player immediately in case they need a player, instead of having him travel cross country, that the scouts and big league staff can go and scout guys more regularly. We can have our trainers and strength coaches assisting the strength and conditioning people at the minor leagues, and having our doctors be available. So the proximity is, to me, the one that has changed dramatically. I think philosophically the minor leagues haven't changed for what their purpose is. I mean, it's to get these young athletes the opportunity for first time in their lives, for many of them, to learn how to be a professional athlete on their own, what it takes to deal with idle time, which is not an easy thing to do for a 20-year-old, 22-year-old, and learning to be a professional athlete. And the resources that we now provide them, especially at our spring training complexes, our 12-month training complexes, are just remarkable, as a few fantasy camp boys are here in the front row and would attest to what I'm speaking to there.
There are some quiet cycles within the professional baseball industry, and probably about 15, 18 years ago, one of those occurred where a couple of the top executives of Major League Baseball said, let's get rid of the minor leagues. Let's just go to complex baseball. Let's put all of our players. Well, the reason that came apart is largely directed by Bob's, or responded to by Bob's comments. Players are better off simulating the kind of routine they'll follow at the major league level, and they can start early. Of course, a huge change in the last 20-some years has been the number of college graduates as opposed to high school players that are coming out and prevailing in the draft. Some of that also reflects a diminishing of the amount of amateur baseball being played, or the quality of some of the high school programs and the sandlot programs. You can drive around towns and now find empty sandlots, where it used to be. I mean, was that on a radio program yesterday? You used to go out in the morning. I think it was Kendrick said that. You'd go out in the morning, you'd come back at night on the weekends, and you were on the sandlot all day. You got in 300 hits a day.
Right.
If you got 300 hits, that was just the first day of the weekend, because you're out there for 12 hours or so forth. So there are some things, there's some hidden elements to this, and the number of African American players that aren't playing professional, that aren't getting to Major League Baseball because they're making other decisions. Of course, you know, there are so many more competitive sports. Some of the African Americans are skateboarding, or skiing, or playing tennis. So there are many more things to attract top athletes. But by and large, I would say, I will tell you that the Pacific Coast League, which is never, well, certainly not in the last 50 years, had a major league team that has owned one of the teams in our league. Probably by the end of this year, we will have 2 major league organizations own a team in the Pacific Coast League. I don't want to say what those are in case it doesn't come about, but the inquiries are there, and the ambitions are there, the negotiations are there. But to have major league clubs that want to invest in AAA baseball is very wholesome for us, because it means they'll better understand this side of the industry and have an investment in it, that they aren't going to want to abolish the minor leagues.
You know, I happened to work for Atlanta at the time when Ted Turner had just purchased Durham. Was it Durham? Yeah, Durham. And everybody in baseball looked at him, in Major League Baseball, all the owners looked at him like, oh, there's Ted doing another goofy thing. And it proved to be obviously a very smart move, and ran the economics out of the Major League accounting department. And again, he was ahead of his time in that regard.
That club is now in Gwinnett.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah. It's
it's
moved
in a
into
suburb
right
of
out of
Atlanta.
suburb of Georgia, or of Atlanta. Right.
Speaking of economics, just to kind of follow up on that, have you seen a change in the type of owners that you have now at the minor league level versus what we had 20 years ago in terms of the amount of resources that it requires, or they have?
Very, very definitely. That's one of the biggest changes in my circle of activities. I think we now have as many as 4 billionaires in the ownership of our 16 teams, of one of our 16 teams. When I came to the Pacific Coast League, I think we were generally kind of characterized as mom and pop ownership. And people who had owned the franchise for 25 years and bought it for $20,000, or bought it for the debts that were on it when they got it. And now we have people, I can't help but drop a name, but Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett. Well, when I was with Warren, and Mr. Buffett, oh, I have to tell a story real quick. I can't help it. So he buys the Omaha Ball Club. He buys 25% of the ball club and gets his buddy to buy another 25, and Union Pacific Railroad buys the other 50%. So when he comes to the ballpark the first day, he swings by the general manager's office. And the general manager's a very mild and understated kind of guy. And Warren knocks at his door, standing in the doorway, leaning, Bill, I just wanted you to know I'm in the ballpark. And Bill was on the phone, and he's a little bit flustered because he's talking to somebody and trying to react to the fact that Warren Buffett is standing in his doorway. And finally he says, probably to his wife, honey, I'll call you back, and hangs up real quick and turns around. Mr. Buffett, so nice to see you. And he says, well, I'm going to be in your ballpark. And he looks like he's ready. Mr. Buffett, before you go, one quick question. What stock should I buy? And the most wonderful, I can't help but tell this, but Warren's standing there with a hand on each jamb doorway. He looks back in the hallway and he starts to lean forward and answer. Bill said, my friend and I at that time are investing in buying stocks. We change ideas, bounce ideas off each other. So we get together and we go look up, and a stock, one share is $7,000. Neither one of us has enough money to buy a share of stock. So we thought about going in together. We'll each buy then we realized you have to put a Social Security number on it and pay tax, and that didn't work. So we didn't do it. And he says, Branch, 3.5 months later, August, I get a knock on my door, and there's Warren standing in the doorway. And he leans in and he says, Bill, did you? And Bill says, what? He had forgotten, but Bill, did you buy? Now Bill doesn't know how to answer. He's an owner. He's a 25% owner of the club that Bill's working for, and he can't tell him he didn't buy one share of stock. And Warren knew before he probably looked it up. I don't know. And he said, Bill, 39. It's now at 39. In 3 months, it had almost multiplied 5.5 times or so.
Wow. Questions?
Yeah, this one's for you, Bobby.
Yes, sir.
You alluded earlier to a situation where we have players coming from different parts of the world, and sometimes we are getting players who are not who they really say they are, and they're not quite the age that they say they are. So my question is, what is Major League Baseball doing, if you can share with us, to alleviate this situation and this problem?
Well, in the Dominican, I can tell you that every team now has a Dominican academy where youngsters, not a very structured schooling system in the Dominican, so youngsters at 14 will come in and be a part of your team's Dominican academy and have to have a birth certificate, and we have opportunities to check on those things. Those young men will come in and take classes, sit on a computer, try to learn English, how to deal with a checkbook, all the basic skill sets, educational skill sets they're not receiving in the schools in the Dominican. And they have to pass a certain set of skill sets before they're allowed on the field in the afternoon. So I think that process is helping us get to a point where we know the age and identity of players. The most recent with Fausto Carmona was truly an intriguing set of circumstances. At 20 years old, for someone in the Dominican, the dream of being a big league player is over. So if somebody comes to you because, again, status quo, which Manny Acta, we used to have this conversation all the time, that we'll have a #1 draft pick out of some college at 20 years old and let him have a couple of years in the minors to get ready to be in the big leagues. But a kid out of the Dominican at 20, we're not going to give him 2+ years to assimilate to our culture and learn the language and be a part of baseball. That used to infuriate Manny Acta. And Fausto, somebody came to him when he was 20 and said, I can make you 17 years old. I have a family here, Roberto Hernandez at 20. This gentleman comes and says, I can make you 17 years old, get the documentation. I have a family here, the Fausto Carmona family, that we can make the birth certificate say you are Fausto Carmona Jr. You pay me a little money to get the document done. You pay the family a little money to accept them as your child. and you have your dream. Well, this went on for years. And so Roberto Hernandez comes to us, and we think he's 17, and we know him at 17, and we see him as an incredibly hardworking, wonderful young man that we saw get married and have children. I mean, we saw him grow up in front of our eyes, and he was to make $7 million last year, and the mother, Mrs. Carmona, went to him and said, "We need more money." He was paying them every year for the service of allowing him to use the name, the false identity. And he said, "No, I'm not paying you anymore." The very next day, he walks in to the embassy to get his work visa, and he was telling us in spring training, or in the clubhouse when he came back, it was the worst feeling in the world when as he had done for 10 years, took 3 minutes, "Here's your work visa." The lady behind the desk just pointed, and there were 2 armed guards at a door that just did one of these. "Come here." And he knew that they had ratted him out. But think about it. If you wanted to live your dream as a big leaguer, you would have done anything in your powers to do that. But I think, again, we're working hard to alleviate that problem, especially in the Dominican with our academies.
Got time for maybe one more question. Back in the back, Dustin.
Before the question, as you get there, Dustin, I just want to mention what you mentioned about players all around the world. To me, doing this for 35 years, it's one of the most intriguing developments in baseball. When you have a clubhouse and there's 7 different countries represented in that clubhouse, and all the different cultures, the language, the music, the food, all the things that a manager of a baseball team and the coaching staff have to manage, not only the personalities, but the egos that come from that, is not an easy thing. And if there's anybody here from Texas, I apologize, but I count you as a different country as well. So, in my experience.
There you go. Branch.
Yeah, sorry.
Branch just
Mike
moved there, Bob.
Hargrove and I used to laugh about that all the time. He's from Perryton, Texas. That they're a whole different breed.
You're right.
Okay, our last question.
Branch, do you think your grandfather would be proud of the way sports are run in America now, or do you think he would be frustrated with the setbacks and that there's still some racism?
You think that's a good closing last question?
Sorry.
Oh, golly. Well, that is probably more than I can bite off. Clearly, I think the accomplishment, what triggers this roundtable is the movie 42, and I think when you see 42, you're going to have some sense that this is a refresher. I think it has some value because it brings back to the fore that very basic question that you're picking at of was this just something that happened in 1945, 46, 47 and it's gone away? Or have we fully learned everything from that? And are we still applying that in today's society? So I'll be interested in your take. And if are you going to the movie tonight? No. But soon? Okay. Well, I'll give you my email address, and maybe you can tell me what your reaction is on that front, and you see. But I think it's going to take certainly everybody that is of good heart and good character to continue to work on this. And that's I think no problems in society never solves all its problems. Problems just reoccur, and they come back around in a different shape or form, and that's why education's so important. That's why I think there are so many things that this movie points out that we need to keep reminding ourselves of and keep working on. And I think that would be my grandfather's attitude. You never quit working on it.
We'd like to thank everyone.
There's Jane.
Oh,
Minton.
all right, we got to give one
Jane
more
Minton,
question. Okay.
that's Ricky bloodline here.
Dustin, we have to do one more here, so.
And her husband Harvey.
And I'll do this briefly. One time when Uncle Branch was my great uncle, when he was visiting our family, he had a long talk with my husband. All right. And my husband, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Better? My husband asked him why he chose Jackie Robinson, and I think this is so key to the whole conversation today. He said he found out several people who would be good candidates to try and had them all come in and interview them. And when he interviewed Jackie Robinson, Jackie said that he kicked his feet and spit on his shoes and took his cigar and whisked it over his body, and Jackie never came back and never said anything bad. And this was one of the reasons Uncle Branch chose him, because he could take the fact that people would get after him and be nasty to him. And Uncle Branch said to him, Jackie, why did you want to stay after I treated you that way? He said, because I knew you were a very good Christian, Mr. Ricky, and I knew you'd had me here for a reason, and I knew there must be some really good reason that you treated me that way. And so that's how Jackie got chosen. But you see, that's gone all through his life, and that's why he did such a wonderful job. And thank you for letting me talk.
You're welcome. We would like to thank everyone here today on the campus of Ohio Wesleyan University and those who joined us in our webcast. And most of all, I'd like to give a warm welcome to our guests here, Branch Rickey and Bob DiBiasio. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me.